On this Saturday night, Alexei Navalny's team confirms his death.
They murdered him.
His mother's grief, the warnings to mourners in Russia, and I'll speak with a friend of Navalny's about his legacy. Ukraine loses a besieged city to Russia, what's left of Avdiivka, and why Ukraine withdrew its troops. When getting greener costs you green, why driving an electric vehicle may not save you money. And Canada's maple syrup producers wish for sweet success.
We didn't quite get what I had hoped for.
What's needed to get profits flowing again.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Alexei Navalny's team confirmed today what Russian officials reported just a day ago. The Kremlin's jailed opposition leader is dead, and Navalny's team, like many others, believe he was murdered by the order of the Russian president. Navalny's supporters and world leaders are demanding answers as Moscow seemingly does everything in its power to avoid handing over the body of the man hailed a hero for Russia. Mackenzie Gray begins our coverage tonight on the battle for clarity surrounding the death of one of the country's most inspiring political figures and Vladimir Putin's biggest critic.
It's a pain only a parent can feel. Alexei Navalny's mother turning up at a Siberian morgue, still unable to find her son's body.
So right now we don't have access to the body and we don't know for sure where it is. And we demand that Russian authorities immediately give Alexei's body to his family.
Navalny, who appeared to be in good health on Thursday during a court appearance, suddenly died on Friday while out for a walk in his Arctic Circle penal colony. Navalny's mother told the vaguely described sudden death syndrome was how her 49-year-old son passed. Russian government officials telling Navalny's lawyers they'd already wrapped up their investigation less than 48 hours after his death, concluding that something criminal had not been established.
They murdered him as they planned to do it 3 years ago.
That timeline referencing Navalny screaming on this flight in Moscow, where Western governments say Russian agents poisoned him with a Cold War-era nerve agent. Just like other assassination attempts on Kremlin dissidents, the Russian government denied involvement. The White House had promised devastating consequences for Putin if Navalny was killed, but haven't outlined what those will be.
Alexei Navalny has been a brave leader who stood up against corruption and autocracy, and he stood up for the truth.
Those qualities personified by investigative journalism showing the lavish lifestyles of Putin and other Russian oligarchs, leading massive protests against Putin in 2012, and an unsuccessful run for Moscow mayor in elections he labeled as rigged. That legacy being remembered despite warnings that leaving flowers or protesting could lead to arrests, which has happened to hundreds of mourners across dozens of Russian cities. G7 foreign ministers, including Canada's Melanie Joly, are demanding further clarification on Navalny's death, Neetu, with German officials later implying that he was deliberately killed.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks for that, Mackenzie. Later on, I'll speak with political activist and friend of Navalny, Bill Browder, on what he feels about his death and what it means for democracy in Russia. Ukraine's president says there is a link to what is happening in his country and the death of Navalny in Russia, who he says was killed by Putin.
Putin kills whoever he wants, be it an opposition leader or anyone else who seems at the target exactly to him.
Zelenskyy made the comments during the Munich security conference today as Ukraine was handed a blow on the battlefield. After months of intense combat, Ukrainian soldiers have withdrawn from the eastern city of Avdiivka, where troops were said to be at risk of being surrounded by Russian forces. As Reggie Cecchini reports, Ukraine's wartime leader is calling for the world to step up as the Kremlin pushes forward.
This will be how Ukraine's military remembers Avdiivka, a hollowed-out, decimated wasteland of buildings that now lies in the hands of the aggressor.
We can get our land back, and Putin can lose.
Amid an unrelenting Russian push, Ukraine's new general pulled his troops out in what he called an effort to preserve life and equipment. It's not a strategic win for Russia, but symbolic of Ukraine's struggles.
The Russian sort of victory is getting them control over a tragic smoking husk of a town.
The fall of Avdiivka comes amid what Volodymyr Zelenskyy says is an artificial deficit of weapons. Ukraine is using more than it received, with some allies, including its biggest backer, struggling to meet demand.
The cost of inaction by the Congress is stark, and it's being borne on the shoulders of Ukrainian soldiers.
A U.S. bipartisan Senate-passed defense bill still faces stiff resistance from House Republicans, giving the Russian military a leg up.
Our allies are watching this closely. Our adversaries are watching this closely.
Every week we wait means that there will be more people killed on the front line in Ukraine.
A diminished Ukrainian defense exposes faults along its borders with NATO countries, which could only embolden the Kremlin to push harder and deeper into Ukrainian territory.
If we allow an aggressor like Putin to take land with impunity, they keep going.
In a phone call on Saturday, President Joe Biden reaffirmed the United States' commitment to continue supporting Ukraine, even as politics stand in the way.
While people are playing partisan games in Washington, real people are losing their lives as a result of this delayed or diminished aid.
Do not ask Ukraine when the war will end. Ask yourself, why is Putin still able to continue it?
An almost eternal question nearly 2 years after this war erupted. Reggie Cecchini, Global News, Washington.
Foreign ministers from G7 nations, including Canada, are expressing deep concern about the plight of 1.5 million Palestinians trapped in southern Gaza, warning of devastating civilian consequences if Israel launches a full-scale military operation in Rafah. The U.S. Secretary of State is urging Israel to open new dialogue and seek peace with its Arab neighbors.
I think there's an extraordinary opportunity before Israel in the months ahead to actually, once and for all, end that cycle.
But in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said whoever is telling us not to operate in Rafah is telling us to lose the war, and there is no point in truce talks until Hamas changes its delusional demands. In advance of Israel's assault, scores of civilians are fleeing Rafah with nowhere safe to go. While the U.S. Secretary of State is talking about peace, Donald Trump has his mind elsewhere. He says if he becomes president again, NATO allies like Canada better meet their defense spending targets, or else he'll encourage Russia to attack them. So how serious is this threat? Mercedes Stephenson speaks with Canada's defense minister and Trump's former national security advisor.
Neetu, the Liberal government has been brushing off threats from former U.S. President Donald Trump that he would force some NATO members to fend for themselves in the case of a Russian attack. The frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination took aim at alliance countries like Canada that don't meet NATO's 2% defense spending target. Here's a reminder of what Trump said about that last week.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
On this week's episode of the West Block, I asked Defense Minister Bill Blair if he's concerned that a re-elected Donald Trump would pull out of NATO, and if NORAD could also be in jeopardy if Trump is dissatisfied with Canada's defense spending, something that would undermine Canada's sovereignty and ability to defend itself.
I will tell you, I'm not worried, but I'm highly motivated. We are looking to do more. Canada must do more and needs to do more. We will be doing more with respect to defense spending. I'm confident in NATO's commitment, and I'm also confident in the United States' continued support of that commitment.
Someone who knows Trump very well says NATO allies should be worried. Trump's former national security advisor told the West Block that the U.S. was pretty close to pulling out of the military alliance under Trump, and that his threats are more than just rhetoric.
But in Brussels in 2018, we were right on the edge of withdrawing from NATO then, and fortunately it didn't happen. Trump is doing this to lay the foundation to withdraw. And if anybody really thinks he's not serious, they need to think again.
We'll also speak to John Bolton about the threat posed by Iran. He is someone who has been targeted by the regime for assassination. Neetu?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. And you can watch her full interviews with Bill Blair and John Bolton tomorrow morning on the West Block right here on Global. We've all heard the warnings artificial intelligence could interfere with democracy. Now, 20 tech startups and giants, including Google, Meta, TikTok, and X, have signed an accord promising to work together to stop their software from creating deep fakes depicting political candidates. The companies also say they'll try to detect and label bogus pictures and video, but won't ban them. And it's still not clear how this largely symbolic pact will be enforced. AI is being used legitimately within politics, though. David Aiken looks at what one Canadian firm is doing with the technology and where Ottawa is at on regulating it.
What a bunch of malarkey.
This is not the real Joe Biden.
It's important that you save your vote for the November election.
That was a robocall created with artificial intelligence software to sound like the U.S. president, but it was a fake, intended to deceive as many as 25,000 voters in the recent New Hampshire primaries. Authorities investigated, and they charged a Texas man.
It's providing us a real-life example of an attempt to use AI to interfere with an election.
But AI is also being used by political actors in legitimate ways. A new U.S.-based product called Votivate, for example, uses AI to help campaigns quickly find potential voters, analyze voter data, and help get out the vote. While AI use in U.S. politics, both good and bad, is on the increase, it's still at the beginning stages in Canada.
I don't think Canadian political parties are there yet. I think, and I, to be quite honest, I don't know of any party that is really investing in that space aggressively right now.
Dean Tester's firm helps political clients, one of which is, for example, the Saskatchewan Party, use digital tools for voter outreach. He's using AI for some basic tasks.
We primarily use artificial intelligence as an accelerator, so helped us speed up the research process, speed up the writing process. It helps us generate ideas.
The big fear, though, is that a rogue actor in Canada will try something like that Biden robocall to deceive voters. In the U.S., authorities this month moved to ban all AI robocalls, and several states are already regulating AI use in politics. In Canada, though, parliamentarians are only just starting to consider potential regulations.
We're obviously very concerned, as should every member of parliament or person running for a provincial legislature be concerned about the potential inappropriate use of artificial intelligence.
There are 3 provincial elections this year in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, and election authorities in all 3 provinces say they are alert to the misuse of AI, and they'll have voter education campaigns to guard against any disruption. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Dozens detained. Coming up, Russian police arrest people mourning Alexei Navalny, and we hear from a friend of the fallen Russian activist. Police in Russia arresting more citizens today for attending memorials honoring Alexei Navalny, who's now confirmed to have died in an Arctic prison. But beyond Russia, from the Netherlands to India, protests and tributes keep pouring in for the anti-corruption activist and staunch opponent of Vladimir Putin. And joining me now from Munich is Bill Browder, a critic of Putin's regime and a friend of Alexei Navalny. Mr. Browder, thank you so much for doing this, especially during such a difficult time. First of all, as someone who knew Navalny personally and worked closely with him, what were your thoughts and emotions when you heard the news of his death?
Absolutely heartbroken, shocked. Emotionally destroyed. Alexei Navalny was a larger-than-life character. He was the face of what was good about Russia, and basically, I mean, it's hard to even describe the feeling that I have then and I have now that he was murdered by Vladimir Putin. It's just indescribable, the horror of it all.
I've read some of your recent writings, and you've mentioned that Navalny's motivation seemed to stem from a deep sense of patriotism and outrage over the corruption in Russia. How do you think his legacy will influence the future of activism and dissent in the country?
Well, I think the point that Putin wanted to make was that by killing Alexei Navalny, it basically said, that anyone else who tries this will die. And so in the short term anyways, unfortunately, I think that Putin's point will have been made, that nobody is going to challenge him, and that's what Alexei had challenged him, and he died.
Can you shed some further light on the challenges faced by activists like Navalny and yourself in advocating for human rights and democracy in Russia? And do you think you are a target of Putin today?
Well, there's no question that I'm a target of Putin. He's made it very clear that he wants to kill me as well. I've been the subject of death threats, kidnapping threats, multiple Interpol arrest warrants, extradition requests. Putin has it out for me. He obviously had it out for Navalny, which is why we saw Navalny's life ended. He had it out for Boris Nemtsov, another opposition politician who was killed in 2015. He has it out for my friend Vladimir Karamurza, who is in prison right now, serving a 25-year sentence for basically standing up to Putin.
I'm curious, how do you assess the international response to Navalny's treatment by the Russian government and then his subsequent death? And what actions, if any, do you think the international community should take?
Well, the international response is one of absolute shock. I'm at the Munich Security Conference right now, which is a gathering of major political figures and government officials from all over the world, and everybody is shocked, outraged. The problem is that ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, we have rolled out whatever sanctions we could think of. I mean, Russia and Putin have been sanctioned immensely. And so it's hard to think of what additional sanctions we could put on him which would have any effect, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't put additional sanctions on him. But I think that the main thing that the international community should do right now is to try to save the other political prisoners who are in jail.
All right, that is Bill Browder, a critic of Putin's regime and a friend of the late Alexei Navalny. Bill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The future of car insurance ahead, why a rise in electric vehicles also means a surge in premiums. Canadian drivers are being encouraged to ditch their gas-powered vehicles and go electric to help save the environment. Turns out it may not help save you money, though. Kyle Benning explains.
While EV owners might see cost savings on fueling and maintaining their vehicles, they could take a financial hit. A new report from credit rating service Morningstar DBRS says it's mostly due to costs of repairing or replacing batteries.
The batteries on the undercarriage, if it gets damaged, even for a minor collision, it may have to be replaced, and the cost is significant. And at times, the battery could cost as more as the vehicle.
3% of all registered vehicles in 2022 were electric, according to Stats Canada. The federal government put in a mandate to have electric vehicles account for all new car sales by 2035. Insurers note there is little Canadian data on costs associated with EV repairs and whether batteries can be repaired or if the car has to be written off.
Some of the components that would be required to repair a battery don't exist yet. But having said that, some of the older technology batteries that exist right now, there is the ability to repair them.
BC Institute of Technology's School of Transportation has started training for EV battery servicing.
With more repairability options and better training and advancements in technology, some of those costs could be coming down in the future, and that would be reflected in the overall premiums.
The report noted in jurisdictions with higher EV uptake like the United Kingdom, some insurers have denied coverage because of higher costs. But it said the silver lining in Canada is the provincial oversight of auto insurance, which would prevent a sharp increase in rates. Kyle Benning, Global News.
Sweet dreams are made of this. Next, maple syrup producers hope to escape a sticky situation. Canada makes most of the world's maple syrup and had a record harvest in 2022. But last year, the weather drained profits. As Heidi Petracek explains, producers are hoping for a much sweeter season this year.
Okay, we would have tapped here a few years ago.
Maple syrup producer Jason Havercourt expects to be tapping his trees in Nova Scotia soon for what he sees as an uncertain season.
I was hoping for a really good growing year and everything to kind of fill back the voids back in where the trees were missing, but we didn't quite get what I had hoped for.
Havercourt's Sugar Woods took a beating in post-tropical storm Fiona in 2022. He lost more than 6,000 trees, which take decades to mature.
I'll never see areas tapped again.
Now he needs the right weather, below freezing at night and above freezing during the day for a good harvest.
Don't want it to get too warm too fast.
Canada is the largest producer of maple syrup in the world, but last year production was down 40%.
It's all to do with Mother Nature. She tells us what kind of weather we're gonna have, so it's up to her to decide.
In New Brunswick, warmer weather caused some taps to run dry last year. The province has introduced crop insurance to cushion the blow of changing conditions.
We're seeing more and more extreme climate events, and it's the adaptation and mitigation sides of that are things that we're very cognizant of.
For Canada's biggest producer, a premature start to the 2023 season caught some off guard.
So we were just not ready for the harvest.
Quebec has added 7 million taps to help make up for that and meet global demand. A surprise sap flow this December, also unexpected.
That's very unusual, but we were able to tap a couple of trees and, extract a couple of barrels.
At this point, producers like Havercourt have done as much as they can for this year. Their hopes for a sweet return now up to nature. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Antigonish, Nova Scotia.